Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. And I'm really delighted to be here and to be part of your meeting and to introduce my long-term colleagues and team members for this project, Alestine Andre and Kristi Benson. Alestine and I are both anthropologists and have worked together since 1992, so almost 30 years now. Our research has included Gwich'in traditional knowledge and oral history on topics ranging from traditional land use, toponymy and ethnoarchaeology, to the replication of traditional material culture. Although we are now retired, as you mentioned, from the Gwich'in Tribal Council, we continue to work on culture and heritage-related matters when asked by the council. Kristi, our GIS manager, is also a long-term colleague and has worked with the Tribal Council, Department of Culture and Heritage, and the Gwich'in Social and Culture Institute since 2004. In addition to managing the department's geospatial data, she handles the digital archives, reviews license and permit applications, and conducts research. I'd ask Alestine to start off our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, Ingrid, and Dringwizi. Good day to everyone. We respectfully acknowledge the Gwich'in, whose lands the following research was carried out on. Chuu Tr'idaoodìich'uu, Teetshik Goghaa, Nèhtrùh Chì. These are just some of the words, some of the place names that easily roll off the tongues of Gwich'in Elders, eager to share the names, plus the history and knowledge that they embody. The names are powerful and poetic, but in 1992, they were almost lost. We are pleased to share with you today the story of how they were reclaimed through place names and oral history research the GSCI carried out with Gwich'in Elders and traditional land users over 25 years. But first, a short introduction to the Gwich'in. Next slide, please. The Gwich'in are one of the most northerly indigenous peoples in North America, with only the Inuit living further north. In anthropological terms, the Gwich'in are part of a larger family of indigenous people known as Athabascans, which include the Slavey, the Tlicho, Han, and Tushone, plus relatives such as the Navajo and Apache in the United States. Next slide, please. In the summer of 1992, Ingrid Kritsch and I were hired under contract by the Northern Oil and Gas Action Plan Archaeology Project to document Gwich'in place names and traditional land use to complement archaeology being carried out on Gwich'in lands to assess future development, a possible pipeline down the Mackenzie Valley. Next slide, please. By summer's end, we had interviewed 23 elders and traditional land users in Teetshik and Inuvik, had 54 hours of audio tape and a set of 1 to 50,000 NTS maps with the locations of 125 place names and other land use data, plus oral history behind these places. Next, please. This was the first time that such in-depth ethnographic knowledge had been documented with Gwich'in Elders in Teetshik. The elders were so happy with the research, they asked us to return the following summer. They were concerned that the names and oral history were not being passed on. And these concerns were well-founded, as many Gwich'in place names for lakes, rivers, mountains, and other features had either fallen into disuse or been replaced by names incorporated by newcomers throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Next slide, please. In the summer of 1993, Ingrid and I returned to Teetshik to continue working with the elders. We documented another 88 named places and heard many more stories over the summer, one of which my father, Hyacinth, is recounting to us in this photo taken at Nèhtrùh Chì, a chain of lakes west of the Arctic Red River known as a good fishing location. The story he tells is about the old-time traditional trail that ran from the Arctic Red River through this lake and into the mountains where people lived in the winter. The lake is important for a fish run that occurs on it for a few days after New Year's Day. One of my father's brothers, my uncle Tony, was born here in December of 1924, around Christmas Day. Next slide, please. At the time we were carrying out our place names research with the elders in Teetshik, exciting things were happening politically. The Gwich'in Comprehensive Land Claim had just been signed on April 22, 1992. And during that summer's Gwich'in Tribal Assembly, the delegates decided to create an organization called the Gwich'in Social and Cultural Institute, GSCI, because of their concerns with the loss of the Gwich'in culture and language. In the fall of 1993, the GTC hired Ingrid as founding executive director to establish the institute, and hired myself the following summer when I completed my bachelor's degree in anthropology and women's studies. This was to be the beginning of a 25 plus year partnership to carry out community-based, community-driven, and collaborative research. The GSCI operated as the cultural arm of the GTC from 1993 to 2016, with a mandate to document, preserve, and promote Gwich'in culture, language, traditional knowledge, and values. In April 2016, the GSCI transitioned into a cultural heritage department within the Gwich'in Tribal Council. Ingrid?
Thanks, Alestine. Next slide, please. From 1993 to 2015, we expanded the Place Names Project to the other 3 communities in the Gwich'in settlement region and interviewed more than 74 Gwich'in elders and traditional land users, ranging in age from 55 to 95 years of age. And many of these had been, almost their whole lives had been lived on the land. The research was carried out in the communities and on the land, traveling by wooden scows and motorboats on the 3 major rivers that run through Gwich'in lands, the Mackenzie, Arctic Red, and Peel rivers. An 8-day skidoo trip with elders and youth along a traditional trail between Fort McPherson and Dawson, made famous in Canadian history for the 1911 story of the Lost Patrol, was also carried out, as were several helicopter trips when funding was available. Next slide, please. The helicopter research allowed us to visit areas inland which were traditionally accessed by walking trails. Traveling by these different methods gave us the opportunity to see many of the named places and experience them firsthand, hearing the stories and documenting these places on site. By the end of the project, 900 named places were documented for traditionally used lands in both the Northwest Territories and Yukon. Next slide, please. Unlike most non-Indigenous place names, Gwich'in names describe what is important about a location. These names and their associated stories are a window into Gwich'in culture and their intimate relationship with the land. They are typically inspired by the following: the availability of resources. Examples would include ochre, used traditionally to decorate clothing, snowshoes, canoes, and other material culture items. Other resources that place names point to are birds, fish, and animals available in an area. Stone for making tools, such as at Nèhtrùh, which you see on the screen here, also called Thunder River, which flows into the Mackenzie River. Good stands of wood to make moose skin boats up the Arctic Red and Peel rivers, plus locations where fish traps and caribou fences were built. Next slide, please. The geographic characteristics of a place, for example, a distinctive looking round hill or an area such as Chuu Tr'idaoodìich'uu point separation, where the Mackenzie River separates into 3 different channels flowing into the Mackenzie Delta. Next slide, please. Places that have a connection with a legendary event, such as Nèhtrùh Chì, 3 hollows in a riverbank along the Arctic Red River in Teetshik, where Raven had his camp long ago, and for which he tricked the people in order to retrieve his stolen beak. Next slide, please. Places that refer to historical events, including contact with other Indigenous groups, such as a creek near Fort McPherson called Nèhtrùh, where battles between the Gwich'in and the Siglet, an Inuit group, took place many, many years ago. Next slide, please. A place where a particular person is known to have lived, such as Newt Lang's place near Aklavik. Newt Lang had a trading post here from 1936 to 64 and was much admired by the local people, being elected to the Territorial Council of the Northwest Territories in its early days, and involved in the 1932 hunt for Albert Johnson, also known as the Mad Trapper. Next slide, please. A place which is considered sacred, such as Chuu, located on the Peel River above Fort McPherson. This place name relates to a legend about a young girl who broke the rules of her puberty training and caused her brothers and dog to turn into stone pillars. These are just a few of the stories behind the many named places on the land. I'll turn to Alestine.
Thank you, Ingrid. Next slide, please. There have been many outcomes for place names research beyond recording and documenting for the future. For example, the research has promoted an intergenerational exchange of knowledge between elders and youth, preserved ancient aspects of the Gwich'in language often embedded in the names. Gwich'in is the most endangered of the indigenous language in the NWT. And it provided insight into past knowledge and use of the land and identified archaeological sites. Next slide, please. The place names research has helped build a comprehensive heritage inventory for GTC and ensured that culturally significant heritage sites and places in the GSR are recognized, protected, and managed in a manner consistent with Gwich'in values. This is being carried out through protective measures in the Gwich'in Land Use Plan and the designation of territorial and national historic sites. For example, in 1997, this research led to the designation of one of the earliest and largest national historic sites in Canada, Nèhtrùh National Historic Site, based on the theme of Aboriginal cultural landscapes. Nèhtrùh includes a 175-kilometer stretch of the Mackenzie River that flows through Gwich'in lands with many place names and stories through space and time. The place names research also helped designate 8 new territorial historic sites, including old village sites, cultural landscapes, and other sites of significance to the Gwich'in. Next slide, please. The place names research also provided information for several award-winning publications used by educators and scholars locally, nationally, and internationally. Examples include the Gwich'in Googwandak book, a land-based and community history book for Teetshik, the Fort McPherson ethnoarchaeology book, and a recent book on the lives of 23 Gwich'in elders called Our Whole Gwich'in Way of Life Has Changed. Next slide, please. The official recognition of Gwich'in place names has also been an important outcome of the research. Shortly after starting our research with Gwich'in Elders in 1992, the community of Artigrade River submitted the traditional name Teetshik for official recognition. This was the first Gwich'in place name officially recognized by the government of the Northwest Territories. Next slide, please. In order to make our place names information and knowledge even more accessible, from 2010 to 2015, the GSCI worked with community steering committees, the Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center at Carleton University, and a communications and graphic design firm called MDT Communications Limited on a project called Goonanh'kak, Googwandak, the places and stories of the Gwich'in. The project resulted in 3 outcomes: an online interactive Gwich'in place names and story atlas, a series of place names maps, and the official recognition by the governments of the Yukon and NWT of Gwich'in place names. Before we speak further about the 3 outcomes, Kristi Benson will talk about the GIS behind the place names. The GIS work played a critical role in achieving these outcomes. Kristi?
Thank you, Alestine. Next slide, please. The place names dataset is one of the most important and complex datasets that the department has. Unlike other datasets, which are partial or based on a representative sample of interviewees, the place names dataset is considered remarkably complete. The foundational research conducted by the GSCI and other researchers was undertaken using 1 to 50,000 or 1 to 250,000 NTS maps in interviews or workshops with knowledgeable elders. In some cases, Mylar overlays were used. The place names were scanned and originally digitized into a GIS between 2004 and 2012 as project funding allowed. Originally, Manifold GIS was used, although we moved to ArcGIS soon after. Next slide. Originally, we digitized the shapes as they were sketched on the maps or made use of cartographic standards, such as affixing a river's name to a point where the river meets another river. However, as our work continued, we found we needed to be more accurate and precise. Specifically, the NWT government required the submission of place names showing the full extent of the feature and using the best available topographic data. So we were required to use 1 to 50,000 NTS data, later Canbec. This meant that some features, in particular river features, were much more complex, often having many line segments and many separate polygons. Hills and mountains were outlined using elevation data. Our choices about what to include in each feature was based on the available spatial data and the guidance of the knowledgeable elders we relied upon. We also based our features, the extent of the features, on our knowledge gained over the many years working with Gwich'in place names of the natural and cultural extent of different place names types. So one example of this is the difference between chick and njik. Next slide. Njik, the one with the N, in the Gwich'in language refers to the whole length of a river or stream. There are many place names which end in njik for this reason. Chick, the one with the T, on the other hand, refers to the mouth of the river, where it flows into another body of water. You can hear this word in the current name for the town that used to be known as Artigrade River, which was referred to on a previous slide, Teetshik. That chick part at the end. It's at the mouth of the Artigrade River, which is more properly known as Googwandak, that njik for the referencing the whole length of the river. The mouths of rivers, of smaller tributary rivers, were commonly used in navigation up large rivers. So this is a useful concept in moving across the Gwich'in cultural landscape. And you can see in the slide how the mouth of this creek, Nèhtrùh Chì, had to be separated from the river itself when we submitted the place names and when we were putting the place names into our GIS. The river itself, Nèhtrùh Chì, and this is Frog Creek emptying into the Peel Channel of the Mackenzie Delta. Next slide. Another reason we needed to create accurate features was for our online Gwich'in place names and story atlas, which was officially launched in 2015. Working in partnership with Carleton University's Geomatic and Cartographic Research Center, we created the atlas using their Nunallit on open source software. Carleton also wanted a data set that was as comprehensive and spatially accurate as the GNWT was looking for, especially for views when the user was zoomed in. Luckily, Nunallit was able to handle the complexity both spatially and attribute-wise, as some of the features on the landscape had multiple names, one from each community. The place names are now available online for anyone to see, along with their translations, sound files to hear the names, oral history information attached to each name, and in some cases, other relevant media is also available for view, including photographs, some videos, and other files. The submission of the names for official status in the Northwest Territories and Yukon, well, mostly the Northwest Territories, and for the online map really drove our digitizing and GIS efforts, and the resulting geodatabase is complex and comprehensive and a real testament to the knowledge and skill of the Gwich'in. So back over to my colleagues.
Thanks very much, Kristi. Next slide, please. Over the years, we have had many requests for maps with Gwich'in place names. In response to this request, and as part of this project, in 2015, we launched a set of 22 maps at 1 to 250,000 scale and a large wall map measuring 5 feet by 7 feet. The wall map has been widely distributed throughout the Gwich'in settlement region, and one of the biggest fans of this map was Gina Benelzi Neendo, the coordinator for the Teetshik Goghaa Renewable Resource Council in Port McPherson, as you see in this photo. Next slide, please. Indeed, it was the Teetshik Goghaa Renewable Resource Council that suggested we create 1 to 250,000 skills maps, as these would best serve their on-the-land activities. The maps were created with our GIS data, using information from the place name projects and follow-up meetings in the 4 communities to determine extents for each name and verify the information provided. We worked with a graphic designer through MDT Communications and cartographers to create the set of 22 maps for all Gwich'in traditional lands in the Northwest Territories and Yukon. Hard copies of all the maps were provided to each of the 4 Gwich'in communities. The set of maps at 1 to 250,000 scale, as you can see, are all modeled after topographic maps issued by the Canadian government. Each map sheet has a cover and border with images of Gwich'in people and the land through the seasons from both the past and present to highlight that Gwich'in knowledge about the land extends back into the past, but is also being carried forward into the future. These maps and the wall map are included in the online atlas and can be explored online as well as downloaded. We believe these maps are unique and that the Gwich'in are among only a handful of Indigenous people in Canada who have created such comprehensive place name maps for their traditional lands. Next slide, please. Almost 500 Gwich'in place names in the Northwest Territories and Yukon have been officially recognized by both governments, significantly decolonizing the maps of Northwestern Canada. Of the names officially recognized, about 70% are new names, 20% are replacement names, and 10% multi-names. Further to this, Gwich'in place names are being recognized on highway signage along roads such as the Dempster Highway, in communities, and in territorial parks. This knowledge repatriates the names to their proper place, acknowledging Gwich'in history and traditional knowledge of the land, and ensuring they are transmitted into the future. Next slide, please. We're happy to say that the Gwich'in place names, which were at risk of being lost in 1992, are alive and well and play an important part in heritage inventory and management of Gwich'in lands within both the NWT and Yukon. The names and oral history have also contributed to language and education initiatives such as Gwich'in Dictionary, a new Gwich'in curriculum for high school, and land-based history books, among other publications. The research has helped the Gwich'in protect their land rights, foster identity, preserve their history for future generations, as well as preserve the ancient aspects of Gwich'in language often embedded in the names. The elders we worked with considered this their gift to future generations. They have left a fine legacy. Next slide, please. In closing, we wish to dedicate this presentation to the Gwich'in elders we worked with from 1992 to 2015, many of whom are no longer with us. We think they would be happy to know that the community-based Place Names Project was awarded the 2020 Governor General's History Award for excellence in community programming. This is a powerful acknowledgement of the value of their knowledge and the benefits of people with different skills and knowledge working together to promote cross-cultural understanding and respect in today's global world. We believe it is important to continue this type of respectful, community-based collaboration into the future. Indeed, we see this as one of the ways to advance the process of reconciliation in our country. The more we know and understand each other, the better our world will be. Hi, Cho, thank you. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have if we have time.